Greenland and the alliance that blinked, how a frozen island exposes NATO's warm illusions and the unraveling of Arctic order, the island that refuses to stay peripheral. History has a habit of relocating the center of gravity without asking permission. Once, it was the Mediterranean, later, the Atlantic, then the Pacific. Now the Arctic, long treated as a cartographic afterthought, a white void between continents, is intruding into strategic calculations with an insistence that borders on impoliteness. And at the center of this newly crowded emptiness sits Greenland, an island too large to ignore and too sparsely populated to defend itself in the traditional sense. When Donald Trump revived talk of acquiring Greenland, this time without the coyness of earlier real estate metaphors, he did more than resurrect a controversial idea. He exposed a fault line that runs through the Atlantic Alliance, the gap between what NATO claims to be and what it can still enforce. Greenland, formerly an autonomous territory within the Kingdom of Denmark, is not merely a strategic asset. It is a test case. The question it poses is brutal in its simplicity. What happens when the alliance's strongest member decides that alliance norms are optional? From polar silence to strategic noise, for most of the Cold War, the Arctic's importance was paradoxical. It mattered enormously in theory, shortest missile trajectories, submarine routes, early warning systems, but very little in daily diplomacy. The ice was thick, the technology limited. And the region's inhospitable nature served as its own security guarantee. That era is over. Climate change has thinned the ice, lengthened navigation seasons, and turned what was once theoretical access into something approaching logistical reality. New shipping lanes promise to shave weeks off Asia-Europe trade. Untapped reserves of hydrocarbons and rare earths beckon. Surveillance, missile defense, and space monitoring now rely on Arctic geography in ways that Cold War planners could scarcely imagine. In this context, Greenland's value is not symbolic but systemic. Its location bridges North America and Eurasia. Its airspace, seabed, and electromagnetic environment are integral to any credible Arctic strategy. Control of Greenland does not merely confer advantage, it denies it to others. America's logic, security without sentiment. From Washington's perspective, the argument is almost tediously pragmatic. The United States already operates critical infrastructure on Greenland. It already underwrites much of the island's external security. And it already regards the Arctic as an emerging arena of great power competition. What has changed is tone, not substance. American policymakers have long worried that existing arrangements, leases, agreements, polite understandings, do not offer the permanence they desire. In a world of sharpening rivalry with Russia and China, ambiguity is increasingly viewed as a liability. Mr. Trump's approach merely dispenses with diplomatic euphemism. If Greenland is essential to American security, then America should control it. If existing allies stand in the way, that is unfortunate, but not decisive. In this worldview, alliances are instruments, not constraints, useful until they are not. Denmark's dilemma, sovereignty without muscle. For Copenhagen, the situation is excruciating. Denmark's claim to Greenland rests on law, history, and consent, but not on force. Its military capabilities are respectable for a small European state, but irrelevant in any hypothetical confrontation with its most powerful ally. Statements by Danish leaders, including warnings that NATO itself would be fatally compromised by American coercion, reflect genuine alarm. Yet they also reveal a certain theatricality. The threat of alliance collapse functions as moral suasion, not as a credible deterrent. The uncomfortable truth is that Denmark's leverage lies almost entirely in the realm of norms and reputation. If those fail, it has little else to deploy. NATO's design flaw, finally exposed, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization was built to solve a specific problem: how to bind American power to European security in a way that deterred external aggression. It was not designed to restrain that power if it turned inward. Article 5, the alliance's famous Mutual Defense Clause, assumes a clear distinction between inside and outside. It is activated when a member is attacked by an external adversary. It is silent on what happens if the threat originates within the alliance itself. This is not a legal oversight so much as a philosophical assumption. that the United States would never behave as a revisionist power towards its own allies. Greenland tests that assumption to destruction. If Washington were to apply military or coercive pressure on Denmark over Greenland, NATO would not implode in a dramatic flourish. It would simply cease to function as intended. Consultations would stall. Statements would become increasingly abstract. The alliance would persist on paper while evaporating in practice. The European response: indignation without escalation. European leaders would protest vigorously. Emergency summits would be convened. Carefully worded communiques would reaffirm principles of sovereignty and alliance unity. Yet beyond rhetoric, options would be thin. No European government is prepared, politically or militarily, to confront the United States over an Arctic island. Economic retaliation would be self-harming. Military signaling would be hollow. Even coordinated diplomatic pressure would falter once Washington signaled indifference. The likely outcome is not confrontation but accommodation, a search for face-saving formulas that acknowledge American dominance while preserving the fiction of alliance cohesion, Greenland's absent voice. Lost amid this strategic calculus is the perspective of Greenlanders themselves. The island's population has long balanced aspirations for greater autonomy or independence against economic dependence on Denmark and security dependence on NATO. Becoming the object of overt great power competition complicates this balancing act. American control, formal or informal, might bring investment and infrastructure. It would also bring permanent militarization and reduced room for political maneuver, yet in the current debate, Greenland's preferences appear secondary. Decisions about its future are discussed in Washington, Copenhagen, and Brussels, not in Nuuk. Self-determination, it seems, is a luxury afforded only when it aligns with strategic necessity. The Arctic order that never quite existed. The Arctic has often been praised as a zone of cooperation, governed by scientific exchange, environmental stewardship, and restrained diplomacy. This narrative was always selective. Military competition never disappeared, it merely operated below the threshold of public attention. What is different now is the erosion of shared restraint. As great powers jostle for advantage, informal understandings give way to explicit positioning. The Arctic Council, once a forum for pragmatic cooperation, struggles to remain relevant amid geopolitical confrontation. If Greenland becomes the site of open coercion between allies, the message to the rest of the Arctic is unmistakable: power, not process, determines outcomes. Moscow and Beijing take notes. Russia, with its extensive Arctic coastline and expanding military presence, would view an American grab for Greenland not as a provocation but as confirmation. It would validate Moscow's long-held belief that Western talk of rules and norms masks a readiness to act unilaterally when interests demand it. China, which styles itself a near-Arctic state, would draw similar conclusions. If the United States can redefine sovereignty in the Arctic for strategic reasons, why should Beijing feel constrained elsewhere? Precedents, once set, travel well. The alliance after Greenland, intact, but hollow. Perhaps the most likely outcome is neither annexation nor war, but something more corrosive. The United States asserts de facto control over Greenland's security and strategic assets through expanded basing, exclusive agreements, and political pressure. Denmark retains formal sovereignty. NATO avoids collapse by redefining unity as acquiescence. Such an arrangement would be hailed as pragmatic. In reality, it would mark a profound shift. NATO would survive as a brand, but not as a guarantee. Smaller members would learn that alliance protection is conditional, revocable, and subordinate to American priorities. Trust, once lost, is rarely regained by press releases. The end of Arctic innocence. Greenland's significance lies not only in its geography but in what it reveals. It exposes the limits of European power, the fragility of alliance norms, and the return of naked interest to regions once buffered by habit and hope. The Arctic is no longer a peripheral theater governed by gentlemanly restraint. It is an arena where power is asserted, not merely implied. If Greenland becomes the first ally to discover that NATO cannot protect its members from one another, it will not be the last to draw conclusions. In that sense, the island's fate matters far beyond its icy shores. It signals the arrival of an era in which alliances persist, maps remain unchanged, and yet the rules that once gave them meaning quietly melt away.